Ryan Carter was 35 years old, and the kind of man the business magazines loved to place on their glossy covers. He had built a tech empire out of New York City with a combination of genius and ruthless focus. His name was constantly in the news, not only for his company's innovations, but also for the silence that surrounded his personal life. To the outside world, he was the ideal bachelor billionaire, tall, composed, and with the kind of gaze that made boardrooms quiet down. Yet behind that cold exterior was a man who no longer trusted love. Years earlier, he had fallen deeply for a woman who had seemed to care for him only to discover that she had been using him to climb the startup ladder. That betrayal had carved a scar that no amount of money or power could heal. Since then, Ryan had learned to compartmentalize. Love was a distraction, feelings were liabilities. All that mattered was the company, and the company was preparing for its most critical moment, a public offering that could make or break the future. The board of directors, however, had other concerns. Investors wanted stability, and the press wanted a story that humanized their enigmatic CEO. Questions about his bachelor status grew louder each quarter. Reporters hounded him with inquiries about his dating life, and gossip blogs speculated about secret affairs. In private meetings, the board began to push. Settling down, even if only for appearance, would project security. It would make the company seem less volatile in the eyes of Wall Street. Ryan resisted at first, but the pressure was relentless. When several influential shareholders hinted that his lack of a family image might affect the valuation, he realized that in business, even personal choices could become negotiations. At the same time, in another part of New York, Sophia Miller was fighting her own battles. She was 24 and studying for her master's degree while working long shifts as a barista in a small coffee shop near Columbia University. Life had never been easy, but recent years had been especially cruel. Her father, a devoted high school teacher in Ohio, had passed away unexpectedly, leaving behind debt. Her mother's health declined soon after a long illness that demanded constant care. Worst of all, her younger brother had been diagnosed with a heart condition that required surgery in Boston. The medical bills were overwhelming. Every paycheck Sophia earned went straight to hospital payments, but it was never enough. She carried her books to class during the day and spent her nights on her feet, serving coffee, wondering how much longer she could hold everything together. When the proposition came, it felt surreal. Through a chain of contacts, she was introduced to representatives of Ryan Carter. The offer was blunt. Enter a marriage contract with Ryan for 1 year. Maintain the image of a loving wife in public. In return, all her family debts would be settled, and her brother's surgery would be fully covered. It sounded like something from a film, but the signatures and the legal documents were very real. Sophia hesitated. The idea of marrying a man she did not know terrified her, but the faces of her mother and brother haunted her more. What choice did she really have when the alternative was watching her family collapse under the weight of bills and illness? Ryan approached the arrangement with the same detachment he used in acquisitions. To him, Sophia was not a partner in love, but an ally in a carefully managed performance. They met for the first time in a private office, high above Manhattan. The room smelled of leather and glass polish, the kind of place where mergers were decided. Ryan looked at her with unreadable eyes as the lawyer slid the documents across the table. Sophia's hands trembled as she held the pen. She had promised herself she would remain strong, but the moment still felt heavy. She was about to trade her freedom for security, to step into a role that would define her in the eyes of millions who would never know the truth. The contract was clear. 1 year of marriage, appearances at events, no public disputes, a promise of privacy afterward. Ryan's lawyers protected every angle. Sophia signed slowly, her heart pounding, and when the pen left the paper, she felt as though a door had closed behind her. Ryan added his signature with swift precision and placed the pen down as if concluding a simple transaction. Their eyes met for a brief moment. There was no affection, only acknowledgement that both had made a choice that served their separate needs. Outside the window, the skyline of New York stretched into the distance, glittering with ambition and indifference. 2 lives shaped by pressure and necessity had just been bound together, not by romance but by ink and obligation. Neither Ryan nor Sophia knew it yet, but the story they had entered would not follow the clean lines of a contract. It would twist, it would challenge, and it would eventually force both of them to confront the truths they had been avoiding. For Ryan, it was the illusion that he could live without love. For Sophia, it was the belief that sacrifice alone could save her family. In that office on that evening, they left as strangers with signed papers in hand. To the world outside, they were about to become husband and wife. To themselves, they were simply 2 people, carrying secrets, preparing to step into a performance that neither fully understood. And though Ryan believed feelings could be managed like stocks, and Sophia believed survival required surrender, the first step of their journey had already begun to weave emotions neither of them had planned. The marriage contract was signed, and the headlines exploded across every media outlet within hours. Billionaire tech mogul Ryan Carter marries unknown graduate student. Paparazzi swarmed outside the Manhattan penthouse, and online forums erupted with speculation. Some claimed it was true love in disguise. Others sneered that she was a gold digger who had struck gold. For Ryan, it was simply noise, another storm, to weather in the pursuit of a spotless corporate image. For Sophia, it was overwhelming, like being thrown into an ocean with no time to breathe. Ryan's penthouse was a gleaming glass tower overlooking Central Park, filled with modern art, rare books, and the kind of silence that swallowed sound. Sophia had never stepped into such luxury. Marble floors reflected her anxious steps, and the city lights at night looked like diamonds scattered beneath their feet. Yet with every glimpse of beauty came a reminder of rules. Ryan handed her a typed list the first night. She was to avoid scandals, refrain from speaking to the press, without clearance attend corporate galas and charity dinners as his wife, and above all keep the illusion intact. There was no mention of affection, no promise of companionship. Sophia nodded quietly, clutching the paper in her trembling hand. Inside, she told herself to endure just 1 year. 1 year for her brother's surgery, 1 year to keep her family afloat. Every time she thought about walking away, she pictured her brother lying pale in a hospital bed and knew there was no escape. Ryan treated her with the same efficiency he used with executives. Breakfast meetings at 7, calls with Silicon Valley at 9, board reviews at 11. Sophia was given a schedule of social events from art auctions to black tie dinners. She was instructed on what to wear, where to stand, when to smile. Sometimes she felt like a mannequin dressed for display, yet there were moments fleeting and unexpected that chipped at Ryan's icy facade. One evening she sat on the balcony, FaceTiming her mother. The older woman's hair was thin, from treatments her voice weak but warm, as she told Sophia not to worry. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she whispered promises to stay strong. Ryan had passed by on his way to his office, but paused when he heard the quiet sobs. He did not speak, but something in his gaze lingered before he walked away. Sophia noticed it, a crack in his armor, and for a moment she wondered if he was capable of understanding pain. The press was merciless. Tabloids ran stories with headlines like "Billionaire Rescues Damsel in Distress," or "From Latte Art to Luxury." Strangers online dissected her life, digging into her college records, even posting photos from her social media. Each article cut into her like a blade, painting her as a girl who had sold herself for money. She wanted to scream the truth that she was sacrificing for her family, but she bit her tongue. The contract demanded silence, and her pride demanded endurance. Ryan remained distant in public, but always precise. At a charity gala, he held her hand for the cameras their smiles practiced. Yet Sophia noticed his thumb tapping gently against her knuckles, a subconscious rhythm that almost felt like reassurance. At another event, a reporter pushed too hard, asking if Sophia married for money. Ryan's eyes hardened, and he cut the interview short, guiding her way before she could answer. It was the first time she felt protected rather than displayed. Days turned into weeks. Sophia learned the rhythm of the penthouse when Ryan liked his meetings uninterrupted, when the kitchen filled with staff, when she could sneak to the rooftop garden to breathe. She began to discover fragments of Ryan's humanity, a photograph of him as a boy, with his parents tucked inside, a leather book, a worn guitar hidden in the corner of his study. Each fragment made her more curious, though she reminded herself that curiosity was dangerous. This was not a marriage built for intimacy. Ryan noticed her too. She was not extravagant with the money he provided. Instead of designer clothes, she bought textbooks and groceries for her mother. He saw receipts left on the counter, modest purchases, thoughtful care packages sent to Ohio. It confused him. He had expected greed manipulation, the same hunger for status he had seen in others. Instead, he saw restraint and devotion. Still, mistrust ran deep. He told himself it could all be performance, that she had read the contract, and decided to play the perfect role. At night, when he looked at her across the dinner table, silent and graceful, he felt a pull he could not name. She was living in his home, yet she was still a stranger. Sophia felt the weight of dual lives. By day, she was the billionaire's wife, attending openings, standing under chandeliers. While cameras flashed, by night she was a daughter and sister, calling hospitals, sending assignments for graduate school, holding on to pieces of the girl she used to be. The contrast was exhausting, but she carried it because she had no choice. Slowly, reluctantly, both began to soften. Ryan found himself asking her opinions on small matters, like which tie looked better for a meeting. Sophia discovered his dry sense of humor when he allowed himself to relax. One night during a thunderstorm, the power flickered, and they ended up sitting in the kitchen with candles sharing stories over leftover Chinese food. It was simple, unplanned, and for the first time felt real. Yet every morning the walls went back up. Ryan reminded himself it was a contract, nothing more. Sophia reminded herself it was temporary, a bargain for survival. Still, something unspoken was forming in the spaces between rules and appearances. something neither dared to acknowledge but both began to feel. The wedding itself was never about love, and everyone who mattered knew it. Ryan Carter's public relations team had orchestrated every detail with military precision. The venue was a historic hotel in Los Angeles, chosen not for sentiment but for optics. Chandeliers glittered, crystal glasses caught the light, and 1,000 cameras waited to capture what would be framed as the union of a powerful billionaire and his mysterious young bride. Investors and celebrities mingled with journalists, each guest measuring their own stake in the spectacle. For Ryan, it was an extension of his business plan, another step toward cementing stability in the eyes of the market. For Sophia, it was a whirlwind she could barely process. She stood before the mirror in a gown that felt borrowed from another life, her heart pounding in her chest. The makeup artist assured her she looked stunning. The stylists adjusted her veil, but inside she trembled. All she could think of was her mother and brother watching from Ohio, on a live stream, holding on to hope that this sacrifice would save them. As she walked down the aisle, Sophia felt the weight of every stare. Reporters whispered, phones clicked, and somewhere in the crowd, investors whispered numbers, as though the ceremony were a stock announcement. Ryan stood waiting, flawless in his tailored suit, his expression unreadable. To the world he looked like the perfect groom, composed and regal, but Sophia noticed the absence of warmth in his eyes. They exchanged vows, short and rehearsed, spoken more for microphones than for each other. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the chill of metal more than the warmth of his hand. The applause that followed sounded hollow, like the clapping at a business presentation. After the ceremony came the reception, a lavish affair that splashed across social media within minutes. Hashtags trended worldwide. Sophia forced smiles as she greeted strangers who addressed her as though they knew her life story. Glasses of champagne, sparkled laughter rose from polished tables, but every word she heard carried undertones of judgment. She caught snatches of gossip. She married for money. She trapped him. She will not last a year. Each whisper cut deeper, yet she kept her back straight, her smile practiced. Ryan noticed the stiffness in her shoulders, but said nothing. He was performing 2 shaking hands, accepting congratulations, deflecting personal questions with practiced charm. The tension between them grew invisible threads, pulling tight with every passing hour. Later, in a quieter moment behind the scenes, Ryan leaned close and spoke in a voice meant only for her. Do not let them see weakness. If the press digs into your past and finds anything embarrassing, it will not just hurt you, it will hurt the company. His words felt like a warning more than advice. Sophia bristled, her pulse quickening. I have nothing to hide, she whispered, but the way he looked at her suggested he did not fully believe. That disbelief stung more than the gossip of strangers. The rest of the night blurred together. They cut the cake, posed for photos, and endured endless toasts. Ryan maintained his stoic mask, while Sophia felt increasingly like a porcelain doll displayed for an audience. Even when he placed his hand at the small of her back, for photographers, the touch was mechanical, not tender. To the public eye, they were a fairy tale couple, but inside she felt like a character in a play she had not chosen. After the reception, while guests danced and music swelled, Sophia found herself cornered by a few acquaintances from college who had managed to secure invitations. They laughed, half mocking, half curious. So it is true. You really married the billionaire. Was it worth it? She forced a laugh, but her stomach twisted. She wanted to tell them about hospital bills and late-night panic, but contracts and pride kept her silent. Instead, she smiled until her cheeks hurt, while their laughter echoed long after they walked away. Ryan watched from across the room, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. He knew what people were saying. He had hired investigators who had confirmed she had no scandalous past, yet his instinct still whispered caution. Trust was not in his vocabulary. When the evening finally ended and the last guest departed, Sophia collapsed into the car beside him, exhaustion washing over her. The city lights blurred outside the window as silence filled the space between them. She turned slightly, hoping for some recognition, some small kindness, after enduring a night of judgment. But Ryan stared straight ahead, his profile carved from stone. "You did well," he said finally, his tone flat. She wanted those words to mean more, but they sounded like a performance review. The drive to the penthouse was long filled with unspoken questions. Sophia leaned her head against the window, wondering what she had truly agreed to. Ryan adjusted his cufflinks, already thinking about the next morning's market reaction. They were husband and wife in name, but still strangers in reality. That night, Sophia lay awake in the vast bed of the penthouse, the city humming below. She thought about the faces of her family, the sacrifices she had made, and the man beside her who seemed more like an employer than a partner. Ryan slept on his side, his breathing steady, his mind compartmentalized as always. Yet in the shadows of that room, tension coiled unspoken, waiting for the moment it would erupt. When the car doors closed behind them and the city slipped away into the blur of neon lights, Ryan Carter leaned back in silence, his mind already shifting to the obligations of tomorrow. For him, the wedding had been another calculated move, an act to stabilize the company's image before the looming IPO. He was used to compartmentalizing, to storing emotions in locked boxes he never opened. The contract marriage was just another deal, and tonight was supposed to be nothing more than a ceremonial formality. Beside him, Sophia Miller sat, with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her pulse racing from the hours of being on display. She felt both relief that the ordeal of the ceremony was over and dread about what awaited her in the penthouse. The car moved smoothly through the city, up into the clouds of Manhattan, before stopping at the gleaming tower she now reluctantly called home. They stepped into the elevator, and Ryan inserted a key card that took them directly to the top floor. The air inside the penthouse was still and immaculate, filled with the faint scent of cologne and polished wood. Staff had decorated the space with roses and champagne, a scene designed for romance, but the atmosphere was heavy with formality. Ryan removed his jacket and poured himself a glass of scotch, his movements deliberate, his face unreadable. He handed Sophia a glass of champagne and raised his own without enthusiasm. To appearances, he said, his voice even. She clinked the glass gently, but her throat was too tight to swallow. When he turned toward her, there was calculation in his gaze, not tenderness. "This is part of the contract," he said, as if reminding them both. She nodded faintly, her chest tightening. He approached his presence, imposing in the vast silence. The city lights streamed through the floor to ceiling windows, casting them in shades of gold and shadow. As his hand brushed her arm, she froze, her entire body stiff. He felt the hesitation, immediately a tremor that told a story words had not. He pulled back slightly, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. Sophia swallowed her face, flushed with fear and shame. She had prepared herself for this night as best she could, convincing herself it was duty not desire, but nothing had readied her for the truth of her own inexperience. Her lips trembled before she finally whispered, "I have never—" Her voice broke, and she turned away, tears welling in her eyes. Ryan stood still, stunned by the confession. His mind raced. Never. She was a virgin. The realization struck him harder than any business deal gone wrong. The woman he thought had married him for money, the woman the world mocked as a gold digger, had never given herself to anyone. Confusion coursed through him, breaking through the walls he had built. He took a step back, gripping the edge of the counter to steady himself. For a man who believed he had seen every angle of human manipulation, this revelation unsettled him deeply. Sophia covered her face with her hands, ashamed. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I thought I could go through with it, but I cannot pretend." Ryan's chest tightened. He had expected indifference, calculation, maybe even seduction born of ambition. Instead, he saw vulnerability, sacrifice, and innocence. He realized that she had stepped into this contract not as a schemer, but as someone desperate to save her family. The image of her talking to her mother on FaceTime, the quiet sobs he had overheard, came rushing back with new meaning. He set down his glass and walked slowly toward her, his tone softened. "Why did you agree to this marriage if you had never?" Sophia lowered her hands, her eyes glistening. "Because my brother needs surgery, because my mother is sick, because I could not watch them fall apart. I told myself I could sacrifice myself if it meant saving them." Her words trembled, but carried truth. Ryan felt something stir inside him that he had not allowed in years, a crack in the armor of cynicism. He reached out gently, touching her shoulder. She flinched, but when she looked up, she saw no anger, only a man torn between disbelief and empathy. For the first time since their agreement, his voice carried warmth. "You should not have to carry this alone." She shook her head, her tears falling freely. "You do not understand. I had no choice." He wanted to argue, to remind her that everyone had choices, but the conviction in her voice silenced him. He realized this woman before him had chosen dignity over deceit, sacrifice over selfishness. Something shifted between them in that moment, intangible but undeniable. He did not touch her again. Instead, he guided her to the sofa and handed her a handkerchief. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the city below. Ryan stared at the skyline, wrestling with emotions he had buried long ago. He had built walls to keep betrayal out, but now those walls seemed fragile. Sophia sat curled still, weeping softly, but a strange relief washed over her. She had spoken the truth, and though she feared judgment, she found none. When she glanced at Ryan, she saw not the cold CEO, but a man fighting an inner battle. Eventually he spoke, his voice steady but different. "I thought tonight was just another transaction, another line in a contract. But you are not what I expected." She looked down her hands, twisting the fabric of her dress. "I am sorry if I ruined your plans." He gave a quiet laugh, a sound foreign to his own ears. "Maybe my plans needed to be ruined." They sat there until the city grew quieter, until exhaustion softened the edges of their thoughts. Ryan finally stood, offering her his hand. "Come," he said gently. "You should rest." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He led her to the bedroom, but did not cross the invisible line between them. Instead, he pulled a blanket around her shoulders, adjusted the pillow, and whispered, "Good night, Sophia." Her eyes widened at the kindness in his tone. "Good night, Ryan," she replied softly. When he left the room, she lay awake replaying every detail. The man she had believed incapable of compassion had surprised her. And Ryan, in his own room, stared at the ceiling, haunted by the truth he had discovered. The contract was no longer simple. This woman he had married for appearances carried secrets of strength and innocence that unsettled his entire worldview. He felt both protective and conflicted emotions he had sworn never to feel again. Outside the windows of the penthouse, the lights of New York shimmered endlessly, unaware that inside its highest tower, two strangers bound by ink were beginning a journey neither had anticipated. The night that was supposed to be routine had twisted into something unexpected, something fragile, something that hinted at the possibility of love beneath the layers of fear and duty. Ryan closed his eyes, his chest heavy with confusion, and Sophia whispered into the dark, not knowing if he could hear, "Thank you for not forcing me." Neither of them slept peacefully, but both knew the ground beneath them had shifted forever. The morning after the wedding night dawned with pale light, filtering through the glass walls of the penthouse. Sophia awoke with a mixture of relief and unease, remembering every detail of the night before. She touched the blanket Ryan had placed over her shoulders and wondered what it meant. Was he softening, or was it simply another layer of control? Ryan appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for meetings. His tie straight, his expression as composed as ever. He greeted her with a curt nod and handed her a schedule printed on crisp paper. "These are the events we will attend this month. You will be expected to accompany me." Sophia took the paper, her hands cold. She wanted to ask about what had happened last night, about the look in his eyes when he realized the truth, but the words died on her lips. Instead, she listened as he outlined expectations in the same tone he might use to brief an assistant. Yet under the surface, both of them carried unspoken questions. Ryan could not erase the image of her trembling confession, and Sophia could not ignore the small mercy he had shown. In public, their lives became a spectacle. Photographers waited outside restaurants flashing bulbs whenever they stepped into the street. Headlines screamed about the new billionaire bride. Online forums debated whether Sophia was a schemer or a saint. The attention was suffocating. Ryan seemed to glide through it, untouched, his armor of indifference shielding him. But Sophia felt every comment like a bruise. She avoided social media, yet gossip found its way to her through strangers' stares and whispered words. One afternoon at a charity luncheon, a reporter cornered her with sharp questions. "How does it feel to marry into billions? What did you sacrifice?" Sophia froze, panic rising. But before she could answer, Ryan appeared at her side, his arm around her waist, his voice cool. "My wife does not answer to gossip." He guided her away, his grip firm yet protective. That night, Sophia replayed the moment in her mind. For a second, she had felt safe, as if he saw her pain. But then he withdrew again, locked back into his world of business calls and late-night strategy meetings. The contradiction confused her. Did he care, or was he simply preserving the company's image? The pressure mounted as weeks passed. Ryan found himself studying her when she thought he was not looking. He noticed she never spent his money recklessly. Instead, she wired funds quietly to a hospital in Boston. He pretended not to see, but suspicion grew. Why would she funnel so much to one place? His instinct screamed that she was hiding something. Trust had never come easily to him, and the secrecy gnawed at him. One evening he confronted her casually over dinner. "You have been making payments. To whom?" Sophia's fork paused midair, her pulse spiking. "Just family expenses," she replied quickly, her eyes lowered. Ryan's gaze sharpened. "What kind of expenses?" She shook her head. "It is personal." The refusal stirred his anger. In his world, secrecy equaled betrayal. He leaned forward, his tone cold. "If you are going to live in my house under my name, there will be no secrets." She met his eyes, then a flicker of defiance breaking through her fear. "I did not marry you for your permission. I married you for survival." His jaw tightened, and for a moment the air between them burned. He rose from the table and left the echo of the door slamming, reverberating through the penthouse. Sophia sat alone, her appetite gone, tears threatening. She hated lying, but the truth about her brother felt too vulnerable to expose. She feared he would see her family as weakness, as leverage, and she could not bear the thought of him using it against her. Yet each secret deepened the gulf between them. The conflict bled into public appearances. At a gala in Midtown, she smiled for cameras while Ryan stood beside her, their bodies aligned, but their souls at odds. The photographers praised them as the perfect couple, but under the glittering lights, their silence was deafening. That night, when they returned home, Sophia retreated to her room, locking the door. Ryan stood outside, for a long time, his hand hovering near the doorknob, torn between demanding answers and walking away. He chose silence, but inside his chest the storm raged. Still, even in anger, he found himself thinking of her face, when she cried of the innocence that had shocked him. He wanted to believe she was different, yet his scars whispered distrust. Sophia, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt. Each day she sent money to the Boston hospital, praying her brother would survive long enough for surgery. She wanted to tell Ryan to let him see the real reason behind her choices, but fear of judgment silenced her, and so they lived in tension. Two strangers bound by law, orbiting closer and closer around secrets that threatened to explode. The cracks in their fragile arrangement widened when the outside world began to circle like vultures. Ryan Carter had enemies, not only competitors in the market, but men who envied his success and waited for weakness. Among them was Derek Shaw, a former partner turned rival, a man who had once stood beside Ryan during the early days of his company, but left in bitterness when Ryan refused to compromise integrity for profit. Derek built his own empire on ruthless deals and media manipulation, and when he learned about Ryan's sudden marriage, he sensed an opportunity. He began leaking stories to the press, hinting that Sophia Miller was not who she seemed. Anonymous sources whispered that she had a hidden past, that she was a scam artist targeting lonely billionaires. Blogs amplified the rumors, and soon mainstream outlets picked them up. Headlines blared, "Billionaire marries gold digger." Stock tickers responded, with uneasy investors calling board members demanding answers. Ryan felt the impact in conference rooms where once confident voices now carried suspicion. He clenched his jaw in silence, fury coiling inside. Every headline was a dagger aimed not only at him, but at the company he had built from scratch. In the penthouse, the atmosphere grew colder. Ryan returned home late one evening, throwing a newspaper onto the counter. Sophia's face stared back at her from the front page, the headline brutal. He demanded an explanation. "Tell me the truth," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "Are you using me?" Sophia's hands shook as she lifted the paper, her throat tightening. "No," she whispered, but she could not bring herself to explain the payments to the hospital. Her silence enraged him. He slammed his fist against the counter. "Investors are doubting me because of you. Do you understand what this means?" She flinched, but stood her ground. "I never asked for this attention. I never wanted the cameras or the rumors. You chose this arrangement, and I accepted it for my family." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Family, always family. What are you hiding?" She turned away, tears burning her eyes. "I cannot tell you." That answer cut him deeper than any insult. To Ryan, secrecy was betrayal, and betrayal was poison. He stormed out, leaving her shaking in the kitchen. Days passed with growing hostility. At public events, he maintained appearances, his hand at her waist, his smile precise, but in private, he barely spoke. Sophia moved like a ghost through the penthouse, carrying the weight of fear. She worried constantly about her brother's condition in Boston. The surgery delayed as bills piled higher. Every transfer she made to the hospital felt like another secret tightening around her throat. Meanwhile, Derek escalated his attacks. He appeared on financial news programs, his smile sharp as he insinuated that Ryan's new wife had a history of deception. He produced doctored photographs, fake testimonials, anything to paint Sophia as a fraud. The effect was devastating. Investors whispered about withdrawing journalists, demanded interviews, and Ryan's company stock wavered dangerously. Ryan summoned his legal team, but lawsuits took time, and time was something he could not spare. Alone in his office late at night, he stared at photographs of Sophia, laughing softly on the balcony with her mother on video calls. He wanted to believe she was genuine, but doubt gnawed at him. Was she playing a deeper game? Was Derek right? Yet another part of him remembered the wedding night. Her trembling confession, the tears she had shed. That memory clashed with suspicion until his chest felt torn apart. Sophia sensed the distance widening. One evening she tried to approach him, her voice tentative. "Ryan, please, you need to trust me." He looked at her with eyes that had once softened but were now steel. "Trust is earned, and you have given me nothing but secrets." Her breath caught the words lodging in her throat. She wanted to scream about hospital corridors and her brother's weak heart, but pride and fear held her silent. She feared he would see her family as a burden, as leverage, and she refused to let him think she had entered the marriage to drain him. And so the silence stretched, filling every corner of their lives. The media frenzy grew worse. Paparazzi followed her to the grocery store, shouting cruel questions. Strangers online spread lies. Sophia retreated further into herself, exhaustion carving lines into her young face. She prayed for strength, but inside she was breaking. Ryan, too, was unraveling, though he hid it behind walls of stone. Each attack from Derek felt like history, repeating itself, betrayal, lurking in familiar shadows. His company was at risk, his heart was conflicted, and the woman he wanted to believe in remained a mystery. It was a storm. Neither of them could escape a storm that would force the truth to the surface, whether they were ready or not. The storm reached its peak one night, when rain lashed against the windows of the penthouse and thunder rolled across the city skyline. Ryan returned home from another brutal meeting, where board members questioned his judgment and shareholders hinted at losing faith. He found Sophia sitting alone in the dim light of the living room, her shoulders hunched, her face pale. The television was on, but muted headlines scrolling across the bottom, with her name attached to words like scammer and fraud. The sight made something snap inside him. He closed the door sharply and walked toward her, his voice cutting through the silence. "Enough," he said, his tone firm and cold. "You are going to tell me the truth right now." Sophia looked up, her eyes wide with fear. She shook her head, her lips trembling. Ryan's jaw tightened. "No more secrets. Who are you sending money to? Why do you hide from me?" The accusation burned in the air, heavy with anger and hurt. Sophia's chest rose and fell as if she were drowning. For weeks she had carried the weight of silence, the crushing fear of being misunderstood, but she could not hold it anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she finally broke. "It is my brother," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "He is in Boston in the hospital. He needs heart surgery and we could not afford it. That is why I agreed to this marriage. Not for your money, not for myself, but for him." Ryan froze, the words piercing him. His anger drained, replaced by shock. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Sophia covered her face with her hands, sobbing harder. "Call me a liar, call me a gold digger, call me whatever you want," she cried. "But I would do anything, even let the world hate me, if it means my brother lives." The raw honesty in her voice cut deeper than any rumor. Ryan felt his own chest tighten, shame pressing down as he realized what he had accused her of. She had been carrying a burden of love and sacrifice, while he had assumed deception. Yet even in that revelation, his old scars whispered doubts. He turned away, pacing toward the window, where lightning illuminated the city. Rain streaked down the glass, mirroring the storm inside him. He wanted to believe, her wanted to take away her pain, but trust was not a switch he could flip. The memory of past betrayals clawed at him, telling him love was weakness, that vulnerability invited ruin. Behind him, Sophia sobbed, her body shaking, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I never wanted cameras, contracts, or rumors. I just wanted to save him." Ryan clenched his fists, torn between reaching for her and running from her. In the end, he did neither. He turned back, his eyes dark with conflict, and whispered words that felt heavy as stone. "I cannot do this." Then he walked toward the door, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. Sophia looked up, her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking. "Ryan, please." But he did not turn back. He opened the door and stepped into the storm, the rain drenching him instantly. He walked down the street, the water soaking through his suit, his mind a battlefield of anger, shame, and longing. In the penthouse, Sophia collapsed onto the floor, sobbing until her throat was raw. The distance between them had never felt so final. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering her brother's name, praying he would survive, even if her marriage did not. For Ryan, the rain was both punishment and release. He let it wash over him as memories of Sophia's trembling confession replayed in his mind. He wanted to forget, but her words echoed louder than the thunder. "I would do anything if it means my brother lives." By the time he returned hours later, the city quiet again. Sophia was asleep on the sofa, her face tear-stained, her body curled into itself. He stood in the doorway watching her, his heart heavy. Something inside him cracked, but he did not wake her. Instead, he walked past her into the dark, knowing the breaking point had come. nothing between them would ever be the same again. The days after that storm were heavy with silence. Ryan buried himself in work, drowning in back-to-back meetings, endless calls with investors, and damage control with the press. Yet no matter how hard he tried to compartmentalize, Sophia's confession replayed in his mind. He saw her tears, heard her broken voice, and felt the weight of his own failure to see her truth sooner. One morning he left the penthouse before sunrise, not for the office but for Boston. His driver dropped him quietly at the hospital Sophia had been sending money to. Ryan walked through the sterile corridors, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air, his polished shoes echoing against the linoleum floors. He asked for Miller and was led to a pediatric ward, where he found a boy no older than 12, lying weakly in a bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him. The boy's eyes were pale with exhaustion, but when he noticed Ryan, he managed a faint smile. "Are you Sophia's husband?" he whispered. Ryan's throat tightened as he nodded. "She talks about you," the boy said softly. "She says you're busy but smart, that you can fix anything." Ryan stood frozen, guilt and awe flooding him. He reached into his coat and handed the doctor a signed authorization to cover all medical costs, including the surgery scheduled for the following week. "Spare nothing," he instructed, his voice low but firm. The doctor blinked in surprise, then nodded gratefully. Ryan left before Sophia's family could see him, his chest heavy, yet lighter than it had been in weeks. Back in New York, Sophia continued her quiet acts of kindness. She volunteered at a soup kitchen downtown, serving meals to the homeless with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back. She smiled warmly at strangers, listened to their stories, and offered words of comfort. The tabloids painted her as a villain, but on those streets, she was nothing but human. One evening, Ryan stopped by the soup kitchen unannounced. He watched from the doorway as Sophia laughed with an elderly man while ladling soup into his bowl. She looked more at peace there than at any gala or event he had dragged her to. Something stirred in him, something tender and unsettling. When she noticed him, her expression faltered, then softened. "You came," she said quietly, almost in disbelief. He stepped inside his suit, out of place among the worn coats and tired faces. "I wanted to see what you do when the cameras aren't around," he admitted. She looked at him for a long moment before replying. "This is who I am, Ryan, not the girl in designer dresses, just me." He nodded slowly, realizing how little he truly knew her. Over the following weeks, Ryan began to change. He asked fewer questions about appearances and more about how she was feeling. He canceled 1 or 2 meetings to join her on walks through Central Park. He found himself listening to her stories, to the way she spoke of her father's lessons and her dreams before life became survival. Sophia noticed the shift, hesitant at first, but slowly trusting. One night they sat together on the balcony. The city spread beneath them like a sea of stars. Ryan handed her a mug of tea instead of champagne. "I used to think love was a weakness," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "But you make me wonder if I was wrong." Sophia's chest tightened, tears glistening in her eyes. "I used to think no one would ever see me beyond what I could give," she whispered. "But you make me hope I was wrong, too." In that moment, the walls between them cracked further. The cold billionaire and the contract bride began to see each other not as obligations, but as people scarred yet yearning. Their conversations deepened, their silences grew comfortable, And though the world outside still raged with gossip inside the penthouse, a fragile bond was forming. Ryan no longer saw Sophia as a liability, but as a mirror of resilience and sacrifice. Sophia no longer saw Ryan as an employer, but as a man capable of growth. It was not love declared yet, but it was love in the making. A slow burn forged through pain and redemption. The turning point came when Derek Shaw decided to host an extravagant charity gala at one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels. The invitation list was a who's who of the business world, investors, journalists, celebrities, all eager to witness his spectacle. Derek knew Ryan and Sophia would attend, and he prepared his attack, carefully planning to humiliate them in front of the entire elite circle. Ryan arrived with Sophia on his arm, both dressed impeccably. The flashing cameras captured every step as they walked into the golden ballroom chandeliers, sparkling overhead. Outwardly, Ryan was composed, Sophia radiant, but beneath the surface, both felt the tension. Ryan had chosen to face this moment head-on. The evening began smoothly, cocktails and polite laughter filling the air. But everyone sensed the undercurrent. When Derek finally took the stage, he smiled like a predator. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are here to celebrate generosity, but what greater generosity than a billionaire who gives away not just his fortune, but his heart to a con artist." The crowd gasped, and whispers erupted instantly. Derek projected images onto the giant screen photos of Sophia leaving hospitals' receipts, twisted to look like evidence of schemes. He spun a story of manipulation, painting her as a woman who preyed on Ryan's loneliness. Sophia's face drained of color, her body stiffening beside Ryan. The humiliation cut deep, her secrets dragged into the open in the cruelest way. For a moment, Ryan stood still, his eyes fixed on Derek, the room holding its breath. Then he walked calmly to the stage, taking the microphone. The crowd hushed, anticipation thick. "My wife Ryan," said, his voice strong and clear, "is no con artist. She is the bravest person I know." He paused, scanning the audience, letting the silence build. "While you sit here judging, she has been sacrificing everything for her family. She agreed to marry me, not for herself, but to save her brother's life." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, her hand covering her mouth. Ryan continued, his voice heavy with emotion. "She taught me what love truly is, not the kind built on power or appearances, but the kind born from selflessness. If anyone here doubts her worth, then you doubt me, because I stand with her." The audience shifted, the tide turning. Whispers of "gold digger" faded, replaced by murmurs of admiration. Cameras flashed, capturing Sophia's tear-stained face as she looked at Ryan with raw gratitude. Derek tried to interject, but his words fell flat against the weight of Ryan's declaration. Investors in the room nodded subtly, the balance of power shifting back. Sophia could barely breathe, overwhelmed by the defense she had never expected. For weeks she had endured his suspicion, his coldness, and now here he was standing before the world, claiming her as his truth. Applause broke out slowly, then louder, until the entire ballroom echoed with clapping. Some guests rose to their feet, and Sophia's tears spilled freely. Ryan turned to her, his eyes softer than they had ever been, and for the first time she believed he truly saw her. The moment marked not just the defeat of Derek's smear campaign, but the rebirth of something between them, fragile but real. When the applause finally faded and the crowd returned to their seats, Ryan remained standing on the stage. He turned to Sophia, his heart pounding in a way no business deal had ever made him feel. For years he had built his life on logic and contracts, but at that moment he realized love was the only choice that mattered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind he had once thought of as a formality. Dropping to one knee before the entire ballroom, he looked up at Sophia with steady eyes. Sophia Miller. He said this time, there is no contract, no obligation, no business deal. This is just me, a man who has been broken and healed by your strength. Will you marry me for real? Gasps swept the room as cameras flashed wildly. Sophia's hands trembled, her breath catching in her throat. For weeks she had questioned whether she truly belonged in his world, whether he would ever see her beyond the contract. And now, under the dazzling chandeliers, and in front of everyone who had doubted her, he was offering her his heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded, her voice breaking. Yes, Ryan. A roar of applause filled the ballroom, guests rising to their feet. Ryan slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that silenced every whisper of doubt. The crowd clapped and cheered, but for Sophia, the noise blurred away. All she felt was his embrace, his warmth, his sincerity. Later, as they slipped out of the gala together, hand in hand, Sophia whispered, "Why now? Why after everything?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Because I finally learned love isn't something you sign, it is something you give." Months later, the scene shifted to the quiet coast of California. Ryan had purchased a beach house away from the noise of the city, a place where waves rolled gently and the horizon stretched endless. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Sophia stood on the porch in a flowing dress, her hands resting on the gentle curve of her belly. Ryan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder. Together they watched the sea, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and possibility. After everything, the rumors, the lies, the contract that began their journey, they had found something real. Sophia leaned into him, her voice soft. "Do you ever regret how it started?" Ryan shook his head, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Not for a moment, because it led me to you." She smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. Behind them, the house glowed warmly, ready to become a home filled with laughter, with family, with love, not bound by paper, but by choice. Ryan tightened his hold on her as the waves crashed softly in the distance. "True love isn't a contract," he whispered. "It is a choice, and we choose each other." In that moment, with the ocean as witness and the future unwritten before them, they knew the past had been worth every struggle. Their story, once born of necessity, had transformed into a love that would endure storms, scandals, and the passing of time. The billionaire and his contract bride had found their happy ending, not because fate demanded it, but because together they chose it.